Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hello, thanks for listening, whether it's on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, wherever you podcast. Thank you for finding The Ron Show however you did. We are all over the place at Threads and Instagram, Facebook, the Twitter X platform, Substack. I had to create a Substack account. Literally to read something, so I did. And so now I'm on Substack, at Ron Show ATL. I'm sure I forgot something, but we'll get back to it at some point in time. There are folks who are exasperated with the Democratic Party, folks who have probably voted all of their life with the Democratic Party, and polls seem to show that not much of America is all that fond of the Democratic Party. And I would argue that of the 73% that said they don't look at the party favorably, a lot of them are probably Democrats and lifelong Democrats. And that's all fine and well. We'll dive into Steve Kornacki's Meet the Press moment yesterday, where he goes over some new NBC News polling that shows that Democrats are deeply underwater in polling. There's a mixed bag of good news, bad news as well for the Trump administration and for the GOP as well. There is a general disillusionment with the way our country governs itself. Period. End of story. We talked about that last year, how a majority of voters want to see radical change. Now, they're coming to find out that they're not really crazy about the radical change that they're getting so far in the first couple of months of the Trump presidency, but they do want radical change. And I see that as an opportunity for Democrats if Democrats could just get out of their own way. I got a text message Saturday afternoon. My friend Calvin, he works in the restaurant industry. He works wild hours. I got a text message at 2 o'clock in the morning. This morning, as a matter of fact, 100% chance he wasn't going to get a response from me. But Saturday afternoon, he did. He wanted to know my thoughts on Gavin Newsom's podcast. Well, I guess I could dive into that a little bit down the road. But he also wanted to know what I thought about what he terms Democrats folding by Chuck Schumer stirring up 10 Senate votes to pass a continuing resolution to keep the government funded. Now, last week, I didn't talk about the looming potential of a government shutdown. I honestly didn't know what Democrats should do. It's easy to hide yourself in the House a little bit when you don't have to worry about things like filibusters. You don't have to worry about a threshold beyond just a simple majority, and the GOP has that. You can sit back if you're Hakeem Jeffries and say, well, you got all the votes. You don't need me. Nobody has to take a principled stand or take what I call a show pony vote where you're doing something, but you're not really for it. I mean, take, for example, the Elena Parent trans situation that we've dealt with over the last couple of weeks. She made a vote that I'm sure in her heart of hearts she probably doesn't necessarily agree with, but Democrats handled an issue really poorly last fall, and she doesn't want to become a victim to it later on should she decide to seek some higher elected office than the state Senate seat that she has. But on the Senate side, when neither party has 60 votes, and that's so rare these days, when neither party has 60 votes, you're going to have those middle ground folks, and I'm not sure that the 10 that voted to affirm this continuing resolution are middle ground folks, but you're going to always have the need for votes across the aisle to make things happen. So anyway, my friend Calvin, just livid, absolutely livid, that there were Democrats that voted to support the continuing resolution. There are a lot of Democrats who feel the same way, that Democrats should have somehow stood up and used whatever leverage they had to get some concessions to, roll back some DOGE cuts or restore this. Or the truth is, and this is what the American people, the 73% who are disillusioned with the Democratic Party, 45% of them, 50%, 48%, whatever that number is, are never going to like the Democratic Party. But the rest of them, the 25 or so percent that are just totally done with the party, you have to understand something. Democrats don't have any power in Washington. None. There is the disparate Supreme Court imbalance. Thank you, Mitch McConnell, for orchestrating that. You have the House, where there is a very slim majority for the GOP, wielding almost no power to the Democratic Party there. And then you have the Senate, which, again, is controlled by Vice President J.D. Vance and a slight majority there as well. And then, of course, the executive branch, where there may be a Tulsi Gabbard and RFK in the cabinet, but they ain't Democrats anymore. And honestly, never really were. But that's the thing I think we have to keep reminding ourselves. For folks who maybe sat out the election, for sure, or those that voted the other way, you can't be mad at Democrats for not doing anything because you left them no power to do anything with. So be mad, don't like Democrats, whatever, if that's your mission. But at the end of the day, and I guess we can even say this to folks who did vote, it's hard to be mad at Democrats. There are a lot of reasons why I don't like Chuck Schumer. Not a lot, but a few, plenty, enough reasons why I don't like Chuck Schumer and why I don't think he should be the Senate Minority Leader anymore. But on this, even I have to say, did you want the government to shut down? We can't talk for 2 months about all the closings of agencies and shuttering of offices and wielding of chainsaws to cut staffing to severely limit what government can do, in my mind anyway, and then sit back and go, okay, so shut the whole thing down. I totally get it. I totally get why people want Democrats to somehow put Republicans in a position where they're to be blamed for the government being shut down. But if we're also going to be mad at the 10 Democrats who voted to keep it open, what makes you think that those 10 Democrats or Democrats in the Senate period weren't also going to be blamed for the government being shut down? I think it was a no-win situation. And again, I didn't even talk about this last week because I really didn't know what Democrats should do. And it's hard to really wager a guess as to how public opinion would have felt about this. I mean, it's easy to say, as I have so far in this opening monologue, that Republicans have control of everything. Democrats have control of nothing. So it's really hard to blame Democrats for something as large as a government shutdown. But I also happen to think, and maybe this is just me having been exposed enough to right-wing media or reading right-wing punditry or, staying in contact with those who are a little more right-aligned when it comes to spinning their narrative. I know that that's what they would have done. They would have focused on the Democrats who didn't vote to continue a continuing resolution by keeping the government open, by calling out the hypocrisy. And that's just kind of how I sort of see it, a little hypocrisy here. We can't talk about hand-wring and kvetch about agencies being shut down or lopped in half and the inefficiency and yada, 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 and then sit back and let the government just shut down. Okay, so let's get to Meet the Press yesterday. Steve Kornacki with new NBC, new poll numbers, and if you haven't heard them before and you're a Democrat, have a seat.
Let's just start with Trump himself, that 47% job approval rating. Two ways of looking at this. First of all, if you compare Trump to every recent president, this point after coming into office, Trump's number here is the lowest, significantly the lowest of any of his modern predecessors, except Donald Trump in his first term. He was at 40% at this point in 2017. So this for Trump is actually better at 47% than he's done. And what that reflects is it's not that he's built a lot of new popularity since the election, but that coalition that elected him, you're not seeing that disappear from him, at least yet. And there's some things driving that. First of all, the mood of the country. This really jumped out. We ask folks, is it on the right direction or the wrong direction? That 44%, you say right direction, that's up since November. And if that doesn't seem like a lot, the last time it cracked 40%, you got to go back to 2012. The last time it actually hit 44 or higher, January of 2004. So a lot of this is Republicans, but independents, that number is also up since the election on the direction of the country. Also, just Trump and his base, we monitor this. Among Republicans, look at this, basically 3 out of 4 Republicans say it's a very positive view they have of Trump, not just positive. Again, at this point in his first term, it was only 50. It's just the strengthening of that base, the tightness they feel in terms of their connection with him. And then there's the Trump agenda. There are some popular elements of it here. Handling of border security and the immigration issue. 55% approval. That goes beyond his base, you see right there. You hear about DOJ there in the setup. And broadly speaking, the people do think this is a popular idea here. A good idea, 46%. Bad idea, 40%. Look at it this way. When you ask folks, what should Doge be doing going forward? A third say much more. 28% say Doge is needed, just needs to slow the pace down. But that's 61% total who seem to say that Doge is basically a good thing, a necessary thing right now.
And honestly, like, this is where Democrats haven't stepped in and said, okay, so we understand that folks want to get rid of waste and abuse. I've yet to see any inference of fraud detected. That's the third plank that Doge and MAGA seems to want to drive on. But if there's fraud, there should be charges, criminal charges, because fraud is a crime. So no, what Democrats should be doing is say, yes, we should also be looking at getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, and here's where we see it. And here are some hard numbers. We're sitting here being reactionary instead of proactionary. Fine, let's do our own Doge. Let's show the American people what our version of efficiency would look like, instead of just reacting to the chainsaw wielding or the changes of the word billion to million or million to billion to try and fool folks. Again, you can't look like you're trying to win a game by just being on the defensive. You still have to score some points from time to time, and Democrats, to me, aren't doing enough of that.
Where it gets complicated for Trump, the man who's leading Doge, negative 51%, wow. A majority negative rating for Elon Musk right here. Also, federal workers, we just asked folks, do you have a positive, negative view? Much more positive than negative in terms of federal workers. And then for Trump, there is, we say, not slippage since the election, but the warning signs. And it's on broader areas of his leadership. Look at this. And all of these areas you see right here, Kristen, foreign policy, the Russia-Ukraine war, majority disapproval at this point for Trump.
And the economy is a red flag because that's the lowest number we have seen on the economy in the history of our poll for President Trump.
That's right. In his first term, this was the exception. He had low numbers overall his first term, but not on the economy. But the economy and inflation this time, look at those numbers and you look at the mood on the economy. Only 18% of voters say it's excellent or good right now. Our pollsters looked at this right before the election. That number was 26% excellent, good before the election. So it has come down. And then you ask folks a little differently here. It's what is Trump doing on inflation? His agenda, his approach. Right. Are you satisfied with what he's trying to do?
Hell no.
43% say they're satisfied, majority not satisfied. And this is the real warning sign for the administration right now. Independents, basically 3 out of 4 not satisfied with the effort that's being put into the question of inflation right now. You look at things like this and you say, if it's politically bad news for Trump, it's probably good news for the Democrats. They do lead our generic congressional ballot by a point.
All right, and that's something that a lot of folks have glossed over. Generic congressional ballot, Democrats have the advantage. It's a slight advantage, but they have the advantage. And I'm not saying that Democrats should be running around touting that, waving their flags and going, rah, 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 look at us, team win, team blue. No, but where all the hand-wringing for those of us who are left of center is focused on the next number you're going to hear from Steve Kornacki, there has to be some attention paid to the fact that on a congressional generic ballot, Democrats have a slight advantage over Republicans right now. And I think that's only going to continue to grow. That's just my opinion.
But they're also facing a very unique challenge in our poll right here. The view voters have of each party, neither is good, but look at the numbers here for Democrats. 27% positive, more than double, 55% negative. And we'll just put this on a graph for you in our poll here. This goes back a long ways, and you can see the trend line for both parties. This is what's happened to the Democrats since the election.
That is astonishing, Steve. That's an historic low, right?
That is in more than 30 years of this poll. We've never seen either party hit a number this low in terms of negatives here. One thing to note on this for the Democrats, too, a lot of that negative rating, it's coming from Democrats themselves. And a lot of that is coming from Democrats who say the party is being too cooperative in their view with Donald Trump.
Interesting. A lot for both parties to chew on. Steve Kornacki, great to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, so we'll dive into a little bit more of this conversation. Andrew Heaton, local political consultant, joins me. He and I had lunch last week. It was a far-reaching, fantastic conversation. Just good to catch up with him. So we'll do that here for the show effort in just a few minutes. Thank you for listening to The Ron Show here on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or wherever you podcast. We'll always put the show notes at ronshowatl.com. You can follow The Ron Show. I mentioned this before on your preferred social media platforms. Blue Sky, Instagram, Twitter X, Threads, Facebook, Substack. We're there now, too, at Ron Show ATL. Andrew Heaton joins me, local political consultant. And thanks, by the way, last week for catching up and grabbing a bite with me. It was good to catch up. I'd been meaning to pick up a tab for you at some point in time for being on the show so much. Thanks so much for doing that.
No, absolutely. My pleasure. Glad to have a chance to sit down and break bread with you.
So these are tough times for anybody who is anti-MAGA or has fought the GOP's efforts for as long as you have or as long as I have. And then waking up to poll numbers when we turn on Meet the Press yesterday to see that the Democratic Party has a 27% favorability rating. Did that surprise you in any way, shape, form, or fashion?
Unfortunately, no. Didn't shock me at all.
Yeah, and Kornacki even alluded to the fact that like some of that negativity is actually folks who are Democrats.
Oh no! I mean, I would say a large chunk of it, especially when you look at the flip. That the article that NBC put out there talking about this is almost an exact flip of the first Trump term numbers early on. That is a reflection of some of the most loyal members of the Democratic Party, not folks who. Not the far left who always kind of find fault with the more normative part of the Democratic Party. Not the folks who are just these are some of your most diehard. These are DNC staffers. These are folks like myself, political consultants, campaign workers, young folks who are young Dems. I mean, the anger and the frustration right now is palpable, and I think it is a reflection of. There is a real sense among the folks in the party and the folks who support the party. They recognize what historically challenging times we are in. And the question they keep asking is, when is the party going to start acting like it?
Who do you see, if maybe one name, maybe three names, who do you see emerging as the party's leadership facing 2026? And is that the problem? Is that the problem that we can't conceive of who that is?
I think that is some of the anxiety right now. Is that nobody is there doesn't seem to be anyone that is clearly stepping up to meet the moment in any like affirmative way. I think you see some folks who are trying to grapple. I think Leader Jeffries is trying to figure out what his path is while he at least seems to be communicating he understands the moment. I think you've got some younger folks like AOC. I think you've got a lot of folks in the House that understand the moment we're in and are giving voice, but they are currently so far down the leadership ranks that it's hard to imagine the establishment of the party letting them step up. And I think that is some of the frustration you're seeing is that it feels like at every moment, the leadership of the party is kind of stifling down the folks who seem to be giving us the most energy to match what we all recognize this moment calls for.
That's a great point. Nancy Pelosi, who still serves in Congress, by the way, only stepped away from House leadership in recent years. And Chuck Schumer, I mean, man, you can't turn on the Daily Show and not get a Chuck Schumer clip that makes you both wince, cringe, and laugh at the same time because he's a bit long in the tooth and he ain't hip. And man, when he tries to be, it's cringy.
Well, and whether he likes it or not, Leader Schumer has emerged as for a lot of Democrats as the face of the problem.
Yes,
he is the face. I mean, and let me put it in context. He has been in Congress, whether a congressman or a senator, he has been in Congress longer than I've been on this earth. And I am not a young man. I am 42, about to turn 43, and he's been in Congress longer than I've been alive. And that feels for a lot of folks like the problem.
So I've got like less than 60 seconds, so I'll just set us up for the next segment here. There do seem to be, at least on the surface, some potential leaders emerging, and you even see disparate directions that they're taking, whether it's Tim Walz, whether it's AOC, whether it's Secretary Buttigieg, or even Gavin Newsom sitting down and having podcasts with the likes of Charlie Kirk. So I'm going to take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll talk about which of these directions, which of these people seem to have the opportunity to guide this party out of the malaise it's in, or is the fact that we have these divergent names and divergent directions going, is that part of the problem as well? We're with Andrew Heaton, political consultant. We're talking about these dire numbers that the Democratic Party are faced with when the Ron Show returns on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn.
This is the Ron Show on America One Radio.
Conversation with Andrew Heaton, local political consultant, and the numbers on the surface look really bad. When we woke up yesterday and Steve Kornacki gave us the 27% approval for the Democratic Party, I still like to point to the general congressional ballot where Democrats have a slim majority, and I think that that's going to grow. But in the meanwhile, the party doesn't seem to have a rudder, doesn't seem to have a direction or a defining leader. You have Bernie Sanders out there who is still doing his thing. He's still packing venues, and I think seems to be speaking to a level of populism that doesn't necessarily fit within the Democratic Party base. I have said since 2016 that I thought Bernie was the left-wing version of Donald Trump when it came to tapping into some populist rhetoric. And the Democratic Party, and listen, this is an 8-year-old story, 9-year-old story, really screwed the pooch on that. But here we are today. Bernie's out doing his thing. He cannot be, listen, let's just be honest, he cannot be the face of the Democratic Party and speak of the future of the Democratic Party. First of all, he's still not technically a Democrat, and he's in his 80s. I mean, we can't pin our hopes on the future of this country to Bernie Sanders. Now, his ideology, his movement, his values, his platform, sure. But I don't see him, by the way, taking an AOC under his wing. I don't see him saying, hey, Tim Walz, you're going to Red District 2. Let's do this together, which I think would be huge. You do see Tim Walz doing his red district thing, and I think that's smart. Right. And I think he's setting himself up for a 2028 run. The Gavin Newsom podcast thing to me is bewildering. Like, what are you doing? I mean, I guess he's trying to win over some of those flyover state folks who think that he's a little too California progressive. Who do you see emerging here? Pete Buttigieg is setting himself up, I think. He's deciding not to run for governor in Michigan or a Senate seat. He's leaving the slate clean. I think he's going to run in 2028. Who do you see emerging, or are we not even seeing the face that could, step up and be that next magnanimous Democratic leader?
Yeah, it's funny, because when you started talking about this, Tim Walz was the name that first popped in my mind. Not necessarily as, I don't know about Tim Walz necessarily emerging as the face of the party, but you're right that Tim Walz recognized the strength in what Bernie Sanders was doing. Yeah. And immediately hopped on board, didn't worry about, is it going to look like I'm copying? He just said, hey, this is a great idea. I'm going to start doing this too. And I think more Dems should look at that and say, yeah, I don't care if it looks like I'm just piggybacking. I'm going to piggyback because this is what the moment, like when a good idea emerges, hop on it. Yep. Everybody needs, and you see a lot of the folks in the party trying to start doing that. You're seeing more. I don't love that a lot of them are going to I'm going to hold a virtual town hall. Nope, don't hold a virtual. Go in person. Yep. Get there on the ground. As far as who. And I want to touch real quick on the Gavin Newsom thing, because I think it is taking the wrong lesson for the moment. There was this idea that, we need voices entering into the mediascape. We need voices. Yes, sure, we do. There was some graph that was floating around. I don't know if it was from The Economist or that did an examination of the media landscape on new media. Media
matters. I think media matters.
You're right. Media matters. And yes, it is overwhelmingly right wing. Yep. We definitely we have ceded that space and we have to fight back. But I think for most Dems, if you ask them, the way to start fighting back on that is not to have a podcast where one of your first guests is Steve Bannon.
Right.
I feel like that is taking the wrong lesson from the criticism. And so I think I struggle with what Newsom's strategy there is. I think, like I mentioned before, I think AOC is starting to emerge and has shown herself through her legislative record to not quite be the radical that she was initially painted as when she first came in. Yes, she takes very progressive stances. She advocates for progressive legislation, but she's not the bomb thrower that a lot of establishment Dems worried she would be when she first came in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think she's showing herself to be a much more mature, level-headed leader. I think in the Senate, you got to look at the Dems who voted no on cloture. And I think one of the names I've seen kind of emerging in the Senate in terms of leadership of resistance is Senator Klobuchar. Her name is getting bandied around. You're starting to see, and now obviously a lot of this coincides with folks who have 28 races, or 26 races. And so you're seeing Senator Ossoff's name starting to get popped up there a lot. And he understands the moment he's in. And so he's starting to get active and take certain stances. So I look through the folks who have been on the right, who, to my mind, were on the right side of the cloture vote, who have been more vocal in presenting ideas. But I think the struggle we have as a party, and we're going to have it for hopefully not much longer, but you've got a brand new head of the DNC who's just getting his feet underneath him, in Ken Martin. In Georgia, we still have a kind of unsettled, unclear picture of leadership of our party to take us into the next cycle. In fact, at the end of this month, the party is going to be voting on changing the bylaws to allow for a paid chair, which potentially leads the way for change for the chair of the party. And so you've just got a lot of unsettled new leadership that is still trying to find its way at both the national, the state levels. But the problem is, we don't have time to wait. And I think that's the frustration, because every moment, every day, this administration is just this weekend. We watched one of the biggest fears we had as a party coming into this new administration. We watched it play out in real time. A court ordered the Trump administration to not deport Venezuelan detainees out of the country. And it's very clear from plane records that they got the court order, the planes were still in the U.S., and the administration went ahead and sent those planes on anyways.
Yeah, and I mean,
and so
what law enforcement agency is going to condemn that, because they control all of that,
right? And to a point that it, from a political standpoint, that hey, I understand they think they've got the higher ground on that specific issue, but what we as a party have to say is that what we just watched. We have watched the administration defy a federal court order. They have picked their Andrew Jackson moment, and now they have set the precedent. Well, what's going to happen if we ignore court orders? Who cares?
Yeah.
Who's going to enforce it?
Yeah, no prospect.
The biggest fear we had coming into this administration has now come true. And my question is, where are our leaders to step up and organize us? And unfortunately, it's one of those things. We might have to be the leaders we're waiting for.
We're with Andrew Heaton, who's a local political consultant, Sagamore Hill Consulting. That's the name of it, right? He works and backs a lot of candidates and campaigns throughout the state of Georgia and in the Southeast as well. So the danger that I think Democrats have with that particular issue is that if they make too much noise about it, it's going to come off as if they're being pro-illegal immigrant. Do you not see that? I think it's a double-edged sword. Stand up.
That is absolutely why the Trump administration felt emboldened to do it.
Yeah,
they watched, and honestly, it goes back to the cloture vote. They've already watched the Dems back down on something that was much less politically dangerous for them.
Mm-hmm.
And if we back down on that, well, I mean, yeah, why wouldn't we put if I'm a Republican, why wouldn't we put the Dems in this position? What are they going to do? Because you're right. If they don't come out and just the right way and walk the tightrope right way, they get accused of being soft on illegal immigration, soft on violent Venezuelan criminals.
Yep.
Yeah, sure, the ads write themselves. But at a certain point, and I think, again, going back to this poll, this is where the frustration comes in. At a certain point, we need our leaders to stop being scared of the polling and show us that they're willing to stand up when the moment calls for it. And if ever there's a moment, the moment that the federal this administration, the executive branch, starts ignoring orders from the judicial branch, this is the moment.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is fascism. This is the definition. This is the ignoring of the equal branches of government. Separation of powers. This is that. Listen, we told you that this was going to be fascism. That this was going to be dictator on day one and going forward. That is literally what is happening when the judiciary is being ignored.
Yeah, and I think the folks in that polling are just desperate for some kind of signal that the party has a unified strategy coming any day now.
Yeah.
And every day that something doesn't come down is one more day where the frustration and the anxiety and the anger will just continue to grow. And something's got to turn the ship around quickly for the Democratic Party. Or you're right, the polling looks like it'll be, it's starting to look somewhat good in these individual congressional races.
Mm.
And there is the potential for a solid wave in 2026, just like you saw in 2018.
Mm.
But it's not going to happen unless the party gets its act together and yesterday.
And again, I think I feel like a lot of Americans are looking for an emerging leader, a single solitary voice. It cannot be Chuck Schumer, for God's sakes. But again, we have these diverging. Let me get back to AOC, because you mentioned AOC not being the firebrand, uber lefty progressive. She is a progressive stalwart, and she is something of a hero to those on the progressive side. But and you and I touched on this a little bit last week when we talked about the Elena Parent situation. This is a self-inflicted wound too, because where you point out that maybe she's not as radical as folks were scared she is, there's also those on the left who are going to go, well, she's not as radical as we'd like her to be, and therefore I don't like her.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and you already see, she's over the last year or two, she's definitely suffered her fair share of slings and arrows from the membership in the DSA. Folks who wanted her to be an out and proud leftist, and their frustrations that she's in their mind moderated a little bit. But I think on the whole, you see the conversation on that side being, well, we're frustrated she's not as far left as we wanted her to be, but she's better than a lot of what we're seeing. And I think at a certain point, that's as a whole, that's what it's going to take, is somebody who can meet enough of the demands of the far left, enough of the demands of the middle, enough of the demands of the more establishment members. And look, that's tough. We talked about this when we were meeting the other day. Like that is always the challenge for the Democratic Party in finding a unifying leader, is our tent is just much more diverse in terms of ideas and thought points than the tent on the right. And so it's always going to be harder for us to unify. But what I would say to anybody who's looking to emerge and is trying to figure out, well, what kind of messaging? Look, 2015, if you'd have told a lot of Republicans, hey, in a couple of years, Donald Trump is going to be the unquestioned, unparalleled leader of your party, they would have laughed in your face. Right. They said, no, he only appeals to the quacks and the loons and the extremists, and that's never what this party will be. Look where you are today. Mm. Like he is the unparalleled leader of that party. And so sometimes leadership comes from places that are unexpected and at the time considered not appealing enough to the party. But it takes the right figure at the right time.
Historically speaking, it's something to point out that in the 2016 primary cycle, he never got 50% or more of any state's votes until it was just him and John Kasich toward the very end. So he was not even championing a majority of the Republican Party at that point in time. And that's something that, deeply concerned me in 2024 or leading up to the 2024 cycle, when Joe Biden felt like he had some sort of mandate that he never had. I mean, we have to remember the 2020 cycle was not a normal cycle. The party and those candidates just coalesced behind him because he was the most experienced senior statesman who had some hint of the role before, and knowing that there wasn't going to be a primary cycle, that was just the safest choice. We've talked about this before all along. I believe Joe Biden should have been a one-term president who executive ordered his way through his first 6 months and then dared the GOP to run against what would have been popular positions. But that's all water under the bridge. Speaking of, there are folks who are wondering, where's Kamala Harris? Where's, even Barack Obama? Is there not a danger in either one of those sort of, tapping shoulders and saying, listen to this person, listen to that person, because that sort of kind of brings in a negative connotation, no matter who they choose or what or how they weigh in?
Yeah, and I think it goes to one of the main complaints coming out of the 24 race, and one of the main complaints about how our non-primary primary occurred in 24.
Yeah.
The frustration people have right now, amongst a host of frustrations with the party, is this idea that all leadership is tapped by, hidden kings and queens within the party.
Well, you could go back to 2016 with that thought.
Yeah. And, absolutely. That is still to this day, if you really want to ramp up Bernie Sanders supporters, is get them talking about the primaries and how the hidden hand of the elites. And look, not all of it's a lie. Not all of it is conspiracy.
Nope.
Not all of it is crazy.
Yep.
There was absolutely, we have the proof, there was movement within the party to try to make sure that Hillary had as smooth of a path as possible.
Yep.
We can't ignore that. And so I think the danger in a Kamala Harris or a President Obama, like, playing too much of a role in trying to help, push somebody or shape somebody to be an exclusive. I mean, again, this has got to be somewhat organic.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be. Like, this has got, that when you talk to some of the most loyal Trump supporters, one of the things they'll point out as his rise in the party and why they adore him so much is he specifically did not have the support of the establishment Republicans.
Yep.
He specifically was not. He went against the grain. He was the unconventional choice. He was not popular with the elites of the Republican Party, and that's one of the things they actually like most about him, and that's what's aided within their bubble, the myth of Donald Trump. He came from nowhere, as far as the party goes, with no backing amongst the elites, no support, went against all the rhinos, and came out ahead and came out on top. And yes, you're right. Never won a primary in 2016 above 50%, or at least none. That was definitely the majority of his races were just plurality races.
Mm-hmm.
But with the way that Republicans do it, you get a winner take all delegate, so he didn't need to. And it allowed him to paint the myth of unquestioned winning, unquestioned support. But at the end of the day, people, the Republican Party eventually goes in and fully supports him because winning is what it takes. And once you're a winner, you're a winner. And I think the biggest struggle right now is we just don't have enough winners, especially on the national level. Like, yes, Joe Biden won in 2020, but then it was just very clear he wasn't what the party needed in 24. He himself was not the man he had been even in 2020. He wasn't going to be able to effectuate the kind of message, and that's what the party desperately needs. But I think there's always going to be this anxiety, going against the two things: is who's going to be our leader that can win, that we truly believe can win. And I think that's that. And even in 2016, Trump didn't really start to truly solidify support within the party until the day he won, because up until election day, even his own campaign team didn't think he was going to win.
Right. So I do have a name, and I'm going to lob it out here. We got about 5 minutes when we come back. The Ron Show, America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Final few minutes, The Ron Show. I'm with Andrew Heaton, local political consultant, Sagamore Hill Consulting, the name. If you are one of those folks who want to run for something, Andrew Heaton could be a name to look for. Are you looking for new business? Are you looking for folks who aren't on the radar right now who might step forward and say, yeah, I'll step in and help out?
Yeah, no, this is about that time, and I'm definitely starting to have some conversations with some potential candidates for both the 25 upcoming races as well as the 26 cycle. So yeah, now's the time to start having those conversations, and I'm open to them.
All right, so I got about 5 minutes here. A name that I think should be on everyone's short list is actually being feted now by a social media account, at least on the Twitter X platform. Jon Stewart for President 2028. It is Stewart_2028 on the Twitter X platform. I kind of think Jon Stewart is the answer. I really do. I think he checks off a lot of boxes. First of all, already pretty popular, wildly popular with everyone left of center, a household name, congenial, obviously, funny, knows how to speak in public, has a history of activism, and also is a guy's guy. I think he appeals to enough of that Joe Rogan-esque podcasty, under 30, under 40 voter that Jon Stewart, I think, has some cachet and could be that guy if he wants to run. And I don't know that he does, but I kind of think this is a moment for a Jon Stewart to step up. Why not? I mean, Volodymyr Zelensky was an actor, right? Ronald Reagan was an actor. Why can't we have a comedian step up?
Yep. No, I think, look, I'm old enough that Jon Stewart hits my sweet spot. He was the voice of my young political generation in terms of, it was clear where his sentiments lie, but he was also willing to challenge conventional ideas and the establishment when it called for it. He was not just and I think you're right to the point that we're looking for someone who can show enough of an independent streak that they're just not going to kowtow to every single thing the kind of the establishment part of the party wants to do, but he's got the track record that shows he's coming from the right place. And I think he's got enough intellectual credential. I think he's got enough on the ground credential. I mean, his work in fighting for healthcare benefits for 9/11 first responders, and some of the testimony he gave in Congress fighting for those benefits is some of the more powerful stuff you'll see.
Yeah.
And I think he's got enough of a track record of being right. And when I say track record, he's one of the few folks that literally his track record is on video. It's on camera. Like, he's got enough of a track record of being right on a lot of positions. I mean, he was sounding the alarm about the danger of hyper-partisan media long before anybody even gave it a second thought.
Yep.
And so I think he also is, and I think this is where we struggle right now as a party. And one of the things that makes Donald Trump so good is Donald Trump understands how to use the media. He understands how to manipulate the media. Yep. He understands, and boy, in terms of a counterweight, there are few people that could counter it as much as Jon Stewart could. So I see a lot of, and I tell you, as far as in the game right now of let's just throw out any name and see what sticks. Yeah. And a lot of folks are latching on to the Stephen A. Smith idea. Yeah. Hang me before I'd want to rally behind Stephen A. Smith.
Same.
And from almost opposite point, as someone who's not been able to stand Stephen A. Smith on ESPN for a decade, the last thing I want is for him to be the leader of my party. And frankly, again, kind of like Newsom taking on Steve Bannon onto a show. I think people looking at Stephen A. and like, oh, he's got the right ideas. Like, nope, I think you're taking a wrong lesson from the moment we're in. Yeah. This is a guy who, by his own admission, is pretty Republican actually on a lot of issues, and he's just liberal on personal issues, like he's in favor of gay marriage. Well, who in the entertainment industry isn't? Right. That's not what I need right now. And by his own admission, he has no deep policy understanding, and I just don't think that's actually what the moment calls for. People look and they say like, well, he just speaks the truth. Okay, well, Jon Stewart speaks the truth, and Jon Stewart also has a pretty deep understanding of policy positions. And so, I would, if someone seriously gets a draft Jon Stewart campaign going, I'm adding my name to the list.
Yeah, well, I'm a new follower. Again, it's at Stewart_2028 on the Twitter X platform. All right. Andrew Heaton, Sagamore Hill Consulting, thanks for the conversation this morning, and let's see if we can't turn this wagon train around with a little bit of tugging from our end of the ideological spectrum. Thank you for joining the show this morning, buddy.
Absolutely, Ron.
We air again, 5 p.m. America One Radio, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Show notes at RonShowATL.com. Back tomorrow, 9 a.m. on America One Radio. Take care. Have a great day.